All right. Shalom, shalom, everybody. Thank you all for jumping on and tuning in. We had some technical difficulties earlier, but we're back on, and we'll definitely be getting in. Earlier, I played about four videos from Brother Nissim Black, and I know with this interview, I'm pretty sure I know we're going to have Orthodox on here. I know we're going to have non-Orthodox. I know we're going to have in America, as we call Messianic or non-Messianic brothers and sisters. But this will definitely be a ground of an area where we all can meet and be able to have a discussion. We're talking music. We're talking about his testimony, where he came from. We're going to talk about Israel. We're going to talk about uh, the elephant in the room, as people say. What is the experience of being a Black Jew or whatever like that. So we'll get into that conversation and talk about that. So I'm going to give it about 1 minute while everybody is joining in. I see people are coming in right now and whatnot, and so we're already getting a text. Brother IJ, get on the live. You texted me asking me what happened with Brother Nassim. So he's on, man. And so shalom to everybody. Brother Nassim, if you want to go ahead and greet everybody and whatnot, and then we can jump into the interview and go from there, man.
Well, hello to everybody that's tuning in. I don't have the luxury to see you tuning in, so Brother Will's got the upper hand on being able to say hi from a more personal level. But thank you everybody for tuning in, and hope that this is something at least interesting, educational, and hopefully uplifting ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, everybody. So if you can hear us, we want to put a one in the chat. I want to make sure that everybody can hear us and everything is good. I know earlier there was some issues with commenting in the chat, but now it should be rectified, I guess, with YouTube or whatnot by its algorithm. So thank you all for joining. We're going to jump into it. So I want to start with just saying, man, I really appreciate you for jumping on, building with us, fellowshipping with us. I think that, it's good to be able to start somewhere, have dialogue and conversation and whatnot, especially with a lot of things that are going on around the world, not just in Israel, but around the world in America and things like that. And so I want to say, man, I appreciate you for jumping on your time and things like that. I know we're in two different time zones and whatnot. And so, uh, I mean, over here it would be, earlier I would have to say Bokotav, but for you, it'd be Leila Tav, is evening over there in Israel, whatnot. And so I think it's about 7 o'clock over there.
It is 7:30 over here, so it's
Okay.
definitely Lila Tov by me
Yeah,
and Boker Tov by you.
absolutely. So let's jump into this. I want to talk about the first thing I want to ask you is um, I want to ask you to just talk about um, and share your heart with your upbringing. You know, I know your story. I did a lot of research on you and things like that. But for my audience and the people who are tuning in, and many who may not have known you or know your story, uh, give us a little bit of your story, your upbringing. Let's start with your parents and your grandfather, uh,
Okay, okay.
and go from there.
So I grew up, in Seattle, inner city kids, and a lot of jokes here and there, but I always tell people every place has a hood, so it should never never be the same. But even in Seattle, growing up as an inner city kid, both my parents initially sold drugs. Both my mother and my father, they were also rappers. They actually pioneered hip hop in Seattle. My father was a part of the first hip hop group, males hip hop group. My mother was a part of the first female hip hop group in the Street Boys and the Street Girls. This is like, really at the beginning, inception of hip hop. They were on it very, very early on. I remember talking to my father many times about this, saying that, that was back when rap was just all about having fun and there wasn't none of this gang banging nonsense. It was just, all about having fun. And he's about, I say my dad now is about 52 or something like that. And he could still bop, like he was like, like he was 15 years old. So So that was them, and natural product of the environment. Um, my environment had never really changed. My mother and my father unfortunately split when I was 2 years old, and the fortunate part was that she remarried. She got my father-in-law. I mean my stepfather, and my stepfather, who I call my dad, he actually raised me and was a very good dad to me also too. But I grew up um, seeing a lot of violence, a lot of drug abuse and use inside the house. I became a natural product of that environment. I was already smoking weed by the time I was 9 years old. I was already selling when I was 12 years old and running with the street gang. Mostly known, more known probably as BGD by most people that weren't updated, but GD and Gangsta Disciple Nation, most people know. So I was running around with guys, getting myself in trouble at a very, very early age. But it's one of those things that when you're in an environment that's producing that type of behavior, you just become, this is just a natural progression of life. So, in terms of religion, my grandfather, he was a Sunni Muslim. He was also, my grandfather's from Chicago. And he had dealt with a lot also too as a kid. He ran away, I think, when he was 11 years old to go find his father in Seattle. That's how he ended up in Seattle. And so he found himself in between there in Chicago. And he was affiliated also too with the gang. I can't remember what gang he was a part of, but there he spent most of his life in prison. And I remember even seeing my grandfather when I remember 9 years old or something like that. And him telling me, when I was younger, I used to love to kill people, like I was a hothead, and telling me so, like not necessarily the stories that I hope to have with my grandchildren when I get older, but crazy, crazy stories came from him, and he came to live with us for about a year. He was also very devout Sunni Muslim, so he introduced me to Islam. I prayed with him 5 times a day. He would take me to the mosque. And after being home, I think for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, something like that, he ended up going back to prison. He went on a probation violation. He was caught with a firearm, and he was in prison until he passed away. Unfortunately, it was in 2013, I think. So very rough beginnings, obviously, and that was the journey going forward. When I was 13 years old, I recorded my first professional song with a producer by the name of Vitamin D in Seattle, who really sort of became like my music rabbi, my Mr. Miyagi, if you would, and really taught me the ropes. And what was interesting that same year, a good friend of mine invited me to go to this hip hop program, which happened to be at a Union Gospel Mission youth center. So I started going there, just really looking to have an outlet for my music. And it happened to be like this place became my safe haven. I was obviously getting myself in a lot of trouble. I got expelled from school that year, for threats with the firearm, and I got expelled from the school district, and I was fighting, every weekend night, just being a knucklehead. And so I found myself like here at this place amongst these people and just having a safe haven where I was just okay to be a kid and to be able to have, an environment of warmth, that I ended up finding for myself that I was there much more than I was, much more than I was at home. So it became like my little safety net. And I think it was a while before anybody had mentioned anything to me about God or anything like that. That didn't really come up so much until they invited me to go to a camp. So I ended up going to this like uh, camp that was run by an organization called Young Life. And it was awesome because it was in the middle of nowhere. And when you're away and you're in an environment that takes you out of your own environment, but you're in one where it's like it's immersive. You can hear what anybody has to say. And when you're dealing with all the nonsense and people, 30, 40 people coming in and out your house, trafficking and all, you don't have no, you have no what we call in Hebrew yeshuva dat. You don't have a clarity of mind. So when you're away and you're in that type of environment, amongst obviously missionaries at the time, they were very, very warm, and they had what to say. So it was an awesome opportunity because I feel like that experience really, really saved my life at that time. I became a Christian there. It was a powerful experience. And I always look back on it and always will ever forever say that I feel 100% that that was what God wanted for me at the time, and you know, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world at that time. And so, and the other part why it was so crucial is because I was going into high school. So
Hmm.
going into high school for me was like, you know, I was going to a school where, you know, thank God we were, you know, good people. We were good at sports, but predominantly African American high school. We were first in sports, last in test scores. Didn't have books, had brand new uniforms and basketball uniforms and football and every year, but somehow we couldn't get books, you know, brand new
Right.
stadiums, basketball gym, you know. And so going in, you could just already understand what type of environment you know you're going into. You know, not, I don't even know 50% of the people that are enrolled are even showing up to school. You know, so it's just a very tough environment to be going into in terms of high school anyway. And I don't, I think that powerful experience that I had at that camp was awesome and helped me. And I think when I was around 10 and 10th grade, I was 16. I had this powerful derealization type moment of you know, wasn't really out of body, but something within started sort of like speaking to me, not audibly, but it was within. And I was coming back from lunch, and it was just a regular day. And I was looking around, and I started looking at everybody, and I started to feel that I knew something that nobody else knew. And I started to feel like I didn't belong there.
Hmm.
Some you don't belong there, you know. And I felt that it was a very spiritual, very strong experience. So, you know, after, you know, I ate something and, you know, I always say I ate a nugget and got rid of it, but I really started to contemplate. I started to think, man, maybe God's trying to tell me something. So I ended up going back to this to the center there, and I got more involved in more Bible study groups, more leadership programs. Became an intern and became very involved. Junior missionary, the whole gamut, and it's very powerful. And I started doing more outreach. And before you know, I had like you know half of my school going to all the different programs and all the different club groups and study meetings and all that. So I became very, you know, influential also to there. And I became the poster child for them. And at the same time, I was still playing football, still making music. So fast forward a little bit, one of my demos made it to the desk of an A&R. I think it was from Virgin Records. And we started having a conversation. And, you know, what was big in hip hop at that time was 50 Cent. So everybody wanted the gangster rap and I wasn't necessarily making gangster rap. It wasn't something foreign to my person. I made it before, you know. It just wasn't where I was in that point in my life. So, you know, after a lot of conversations and you know a little bit of bribery, you know, they were talking big numbers for me at that time and big numbers, and I eventually folded in. And it wasn't just the music that changed. The environment started to change again. Everything started to go back, and I started to find myself you know, in a place where I was unsure who I was. I just started dating my girlfriend's now my wife. And I was with her, I was one person, and with my guys, I was a different person. And you know, and I started getting into a place where I also started to really like be confused about who I was. Long story short, the music we didn't end up doing that deal. I lost my mother from an overdose. My mother overdosed when I was 19. So, which is the same year I released my first album. I went to go meet with other labels, Shady Records, Atlantic, all the other ones. And right after Jay Z and Dame Dash split, Clark Kent ended up being the president of Dame Dash Music Group. So I had meetings with him, and that was seeming like the most promising everything. And we thought we were going to have a deal over there. It was a conference call with Dash, whatever, and didn't end up working out, which actually ended up being a blessing in disguise. We came back, did everything independent, just put out the record that we had, and started making a lot of noise, which eventually will lead to a rap beef with another artist who mentioned my name in a song. And I happen to have friends that were, you know, they weren't just making rap music. They were so their natural response was like, we're just gonna make another song. So that obviously ended up into, you know, turning into a physical altercation, which ended up to a friend of mine, you know, after I'd actually already left after we had got into a brawl outside of one of the nightclubs, I had left, and a friend of mine went up afterwards and he tried to take the other guy's life and chased him. It was a whole shooting situation, and he ended up getting caught by the police, turned into a high-speed chase. They caught him, and he went in, but they thought that I sent him to do it, like you know, like I had you know had what to do with it, and I really didn't. And so that put me in a situation to where now I have to contemplate taking this other person's life. He's going to take my life. And I always say to everybody, especially all these young guys, like if you can continue to act and portray like you're really street, whether you are, whether you're not, or whether you really do have the, what it takes or what it doesn't take, you will get your shot. You will get your shot to see if you're really about it, if this is what you're really about. And my opportunity came, and I said, "This is not what I'm really about. I'm not really about this." I do
Right.
want to live. I love my girlfriend who I was with at the time. I lost my mother, and the pain that I suffered at that time. I remember losing my mom. I was so like crippled emotionally, like I didn't even I wouldn't have wished the pain on my worst enemy.
Yeah.
So to just like be in a place where you're like feeling so broken like that, you feel so like submissive. Like, God, what do you want? Like I can't pretend to be something that I'm not. Like, I'm harder than what I am. So like you being back in a situation where it's like your life is somebody else's life, you get to choose. Like, are you really about it? Not for myself. I wasn't. I'm not afraid of saying I'm not the tough guy. I got
Yeah.
myself in trouble when I was young and all that, but there was nothing cool about not being able to be a person that gets to live to see your grandchildren, hopefully. So
Mhm.
um God, I broke down, started crying, started praying. That's all I did. Just started praying, praying, praying. And I would say God performed a miracle for me that the God called. And and I think really it was people, that knew us, that were in the streets, know that even though, we were out there making records and acting like we're this. When I was younger, I was doing stupid stuff, but everybody thought I was still really a peaceful guy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I was still like, I was bringing people from one hood to the other hood together. Like, I was just not that type of dude. So I think they had enough confidence to like call me and, have a real conversation. We squashed everything. And then after that, I realized for myself, like, next time it could be the real thing. So I stayed home and I stayed praying and stayed praying and stayed praying. And away from everybody, there's no grandpa, there's no missionary group or team, there's nothing there. It's just me. I grabbed the Bible again and I started reading. And just I had new eyes and and a new understanding. I hit the reset button a little bit, starting from nothing and started trying to find out what was real and what wasn't real. And I started to have a lot of questions, talking to God, and eventually, I mean, in the shortest way I could say is just the Torah was just glowing, glowing, glowing to me. And then
Okay. Stop.
obviously,
Stop right there.
go
Stop
ahead,
right
go
there.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Stop right there. Stop right there. So
It's been about 30 minutes.
I want to segue that into into this because um let me say so um your first experience wasn't a Christian experience. It was being with your grandfather who was a Sunni
Muslim.
Muslim,
Right,
right?
right,
And so the being devout in that because many people don't understand the difference between a Shiite, a Sunni, Nation of Islam, that they're all not the same as far as
right,
how they practice, uh,
right.
whatnot. So looking at the being a Sunni Muslim, there was that was around what 9 years old? No, was that five?
Yeah, it's about eight or nine
About
around there.
8 or 9. Now, around that time, um, you were going to the mosque and things like that. So, but did around that time, did you have an understanding? Because of course, Muslims still deal with Torah. So,
Right.
um, did you have an experience or an understanding around that time, around 9? Not to say a deep understanding, but some form of understanding, or was it just, hey, I'm following my grandfather to the mosque and things like that? But it wasn't what really wasn't a practice for you yet. Would you say
No, yeah, it was really just me being with my grandfather, and I would say like this, so I shorten the story a lot, but I'll just drop in this little nugget was when right before I started going to the Union Gospel Mission, like when I started going to that thing, um, I did start searching again on my own already at 13. I really already wanted to know, like, I was already being a knucklehead or whatever, and I had an uncle who was also Muslim.
that? Okay.
And so it was natural for me to like reach out to my uncle and be like, because my grandfather was, that was the only real like religion I had. I had like been to church. My auntie would
Yeah.
like come pick me up every once in a while, like Easter Sunday or something. But I just went there and played with the other kids, and but I didn't know anything about it. But it's different, like even with Islam and Judaism, because there's a practice, there's a way of praying, there's a whole system involved in the religion, right? So at least in the mosque, you're gonna remember praying or bowing down or a little bit of the Arabic that you were saying, or what I'm saying, when you were eating blessed food or different things like that. So it was already more structure to it. So it got more stuck in my head even as a kid.
Right.
Um, so when I started searching again, I asked my uncle about stuff, and he was already a different type of Muslim. He was like, what do they call him? They're like Moorish, a lot of guys from Chicago or whatever.
Right.
So I started like getting back involved in Islam, but like sort of through my uncle's way, his dad, and it was my natural response because that's what I remember from my grandfather. My grandfather was a Muslim,
Mm.
so I went and asked my Muslim uncle to start showing me, showing me things. Um, so that was it. But I can't say like I had a full understanding like that,
Right.
Um, I just knew really basically what my grandfather taught me, but I wouldn't be like, oh, I was a devout Muslim because I wasn't. I seen that, to be quite honest, my grandfather was still acting a nut and he was a Muslim, you know what I mean? And
Right.
my uncle too, he was like, man, he was doing things that, they were devoted to what they believed in, but they also at the same time was still like, it wasn't a complete change.
Right. So basically, I'll read a comment here. Brother Dean, brother Royal says, so he was a Muslim and not a bean pie Muslim.
Yeah. I was Muslim, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Fine. Listen, I never had one of those bean pies, but the nation they were kind of thick in Seattle also too.
Okay.
But they used to be at every every stop. You know what I'm saying? Out there, the car stop. You about to get to buy some bean pies and some incense. You know,
Right.
but I haven't had the bean pie.
So at this, so let's fast forward back to where I kind of ended you at.
Mhm.
I guess that would be the start of your journey. That wasn't 13, was it? Was that beyond? Because I think that you're saying that you were at a school or some type of after school program or something like
Yeah.
that.
By that time, yeah, I was 13 when I was going to the New Gospels. When I started going there, yeah, I was 13.
Okay. So from that point on, that wasn't your introduction to Judaism though, right?
No, no, that was my introduction. Really, that was like Christianity. Uh,
Okay.
that
Okay,
was like,
let's talk about that. Let's talk about since that experience. So you going from Muslim to now going into I guess an understanding of Christianity. This is a part of your search
mhm,
at 13. So let's kind of talk about your experience, I guess would be I guess as a Christian
mhm.
within the Christianity. What is that structure? What was that structure and experience like?
So one thing I would say about myself always was that I had a very intuitive cognizance of God, even as a kid, right?
Mhm.
Um, very, very young. Even when to my grandfather, all this stuff, like, I don't know if I connected the relationship that he was, grooming me to in Islam to God, but I always have felt very like some type of closeness to God, even though I couldn't put my finger on it.
Right.
So when I went to that, the real experience happened that, I was going to the center, they invited me to camp. We get to camp, and the only way I know how to pray is like a Muslim. So when everybody else prayed, I prayed. I stayed away from everybody else, and I went
Mhm.
over and did my own prayers and salat, whatever. And so I was 13 at this time, 14 by this time. And so when I went, the more and more I went there, and it was like a day, the way that it worked out, somebody would speak. He was giving over like his testimony, and but he was like the main speaker, and then he'll give these list of questions. We will all go back to the cabin and discuss these things. Now, after a while, you start to think like, man, hold on, maybe the way I'm growing up isn't like, the real. You're now starting to see other people to tell you things that are, to wake you up a little bit. And being there, I was just very intrigued. I was just away from everything, so my heart was like so open. And, when you're around, people that are missionaries, if they ask you a question, it's because they have an answer, right?
Right.
So obviously, that answer for every single question I had, and I started reading the Bible with them and whatever. And I ended up going for the altar call, and it was a crazy experience. Like, I'm not gonna lie, man, I was just crying like everybody else was crying, and I had a very, very powerful experience of feeling like, my feet was off the ground type of thing. You know what I mean? Like, very feet was off the ground, felt very, very close to God. I was like high. I was on a spiritual high, like for 8 months after that. You know what I mean? It was like it was so crazy that I remember coming back home like a week or so late, 2 weeks or something like that later. And this is right when the sidekicks that came out, the two ways, and I'm already telling them how old I am. The two ways that came out, and I was looking at my messages, and I was just looking at the way I was talking. My transformation situation only happened like a week ago.
Right.
Already, I was already feeling like I didn't recognize who I was already. You understand what I'm saying? So that's how powerful that experience, and I became a serious Bible thumper. I was
No,
reading
no,
my
no,
Bible,
come on. You
and
didn't. You you wasn't busting everybody over. You wasn't sending everybody to hell, was you?
man, I was on it. I mean, just really more than just like hitting people over the head with it. It was like I ascribed no importance to my schoolwork. I was up in chemistry class, just in the Bible, highlighting it, not just, everything else is nonsense, like I'm just,
Right.
and, that wasn't so great on my grades. I passed those first couple of years, but by a hair. But I was just so like focused on that, and eventually, you get knocked off. People found out I rapped. I started doing rap battles in school, and the whole thing. So, but I was really, really into. But I built in that time a relationship with God. It was very foundational. Even for my relationship I have with God today, it was very foundational. And I prayed a lot. I really caught on to prayer. I was 15, 16 years old, just like praying for hours. Just crying to God. Even in my room. And I remember, I'll tell you one story. I was 10, and it also happened. I was in 10th grade, 16 years old. Now, I got in trouble with the law when I was like 13 with my cousins or whatever. And this time, a lot of things I could have got in trouble for. This time, I really didn't do nothing. I was just with the wrong guys. So much so that after we got arrested, they let me go. My cousin and my brother, other people that were with me, they got thrown in. They were in custody for a few days or a week or something like that. But they let me go. So in between that time of 13, 16, later on that year, right before I went to get my house had burned down.
Hmm.
So they were sending mail that I had to appear in a court. I never got. So I didn't even know what was going on. I was living like in another city near Seattle, in Renton. And so years have gone by, I had my transformation. I'm involved in the Union Gospel Mission, whatever, and whatever. And I was at my cousin's house one one day on a school day. I don't know why I lived close to the school, but I stayed by him, and my aunt was giving us a ride, and we noticed that there was a lot of minivans around us. And when we got to a certain intersection, it was on Henderson. We got to a certain intersection. All of a sudden, all these minivans start surrounding us, and they get out with guns, and it's the U.S. Marshals. U.S. Marshals, because the car we was in was under my uncle's name, and they were looking for him. So they got us out, went to the procedure, took our IDs, and we're big boys. They wanted to make sure we weren't him, and they found that I had a warrant for my arrest. So they called the SPD, the local police. They came pick me up and took me to juvenile detention. Now I'm saved. I'm saved. You know what I mean? I'm by the grace. I'm that guy, Bible thumper, and this
Yeah.
is the guy they come and get. Whoever they were looking for was gone already 3 years ago. So I go into this place and I can't believe it. I'm in the jumpsuit and whatever, and they put me into this cell, and there's a toilet, a Bible, and a bed. And it's like this big. I'm in this place. And these kids are crazy. They're hanging off the roofs. You see the guards grabbing. I'm talking about kids who just not stable. And I got into my room. I had so much peace, so much peace. I started praying. I started reading the Psalms. I was like sitting in this place, and I was having Gan Eden. I was in heaven inside this place. I have no idea how, but I
Yeah.
but I was, and I knew everything was going to be all right. So, so short, I was there for a couple of days, and they buzzed in and they said that I had a visitor. So they came and got me, took me up to the room, And I go into this room waiting for my visitor to walk in, and all of a sudden it's my mentor from from the Christian Center. He walks in, John Reed, and he comes in. He starts cracking up. He's laughing at the top, and he's laughing so hard that I start laughing with him. You know what I mean? You know how it is. Like he's laughing, so I don't ever laugh. So after we quit laughing, I'm like, why are we laughing? Because every day I take you home last. After every Bible study group or whatever, I'm the last one to go. I won his heart. So me and him would stay and talk about God for hours after. And he said, what you've been saying to me a lot lately is that you've been begging God to have time with just you and him, with nobody else around, not influence. He said, be careful what you pray for, you
Yeah.
know? So they ended up letting me out of this place, and I got out. I mean, the whole community came out, wrote letters and whatever, and they threw everything out, expunged everything. And I went right after that. I went to Mexico to help them build an orphanage. So I was like I say to be very involved, but my relationship was a real relationship. It wasn't like, oh, he didn't really. No, with Christianity, I much more so had more of a relationship.
Right. Okay. So let's kind of transition a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, we talked about the music, of course, the deal. Let's kind of get into um the videos. You know,
Hmm.
um, I played a couple earlier. I played the one, I think it was called "When." It had Amari Stoudemire.
Yeah, yeah.
And that where was that video shot at? Was it shot in Israel?
Yeah, it was shot in Israel. I mean, yeah, we shot over here. I have a certain place, of course, that I go and do prayer at actually, like on my personal prayer. I go and away from everybody, and it's so beautiful over there. And I had the idea to shoot this video, and I was like, man, I really want to do this video over here. And I'm telling you, the way it came through was all divine providence. But we shot it here in Beit Shemesh in Israel, in a place called Sora Forest.
Hmm. Were you
Yeah.
there, were you in Israel during the time? Are you familiar with Shine, right?
Yeah, I came here when I first had come to visit, which was really like my pilot trip, was 2013. He was still here. I missed him. My brother-in-law was with me, but he's seen him. But I missed him when we were at the hotel, so I didn't get to get in touch with him. Unfortunately, he's not living the same. I think he moved to Belize.
Yeah.
So I hope he's happy. But we didn't get to make a connection, unfortunately.
Okay. So let's kind of talk about the song, the
Mhm.
song Motherland Bounce, right? The Motherland song, right? So that is
Yeah,
the song. That is kind of like the song that probably uh I would say, I know it opened up a lot of attention in our community
right,
here,
right.
Messianic Israelite community. And people was, it whether whatever side of the fence you're on, you was like, wait a minute, hold on. The garments and attire that is worn, uh, uh, that what they saw you, it was like, wait a minute, they're used to seeing non-melanin people, you
Right,
know.
right,
So that kind of like, well, I believe that people enjoyed the music, they felt the music, they know the music was dope, but
right,
the imagery for black people,
right.
for Hebrews, they couldn't get that. So let's kind of talk about that.
Right.
Um, just, I'll tell you this. Just explain um the I guess let's explain the type for those who don't know. Um,
Mhm.
let's just kind of go from top to bottom. I know what you had on what many would call in our community zitzies or tassels. You have
Right.
those on, which
Mhm.
is not odd. Many
Right.
brothers here in America, they wear fringes and things like that,
Mhm.
which isn't strange. But so let's just start from the top, from
With
the
the
hat.
Bekasha, I had on the Bekasha, and then I
Uh-huh.
had my Strima. It's not in here. I have my regular hat that's back there hanging up, but
Right.
my beaver hats that I wear during the weekdays, and usually on the Sabbath or on the holidays, I wear the Strima, which is more the fur type hat.
Hmm.
Um, and what else did I had? I had on my Yeezys, but that's not usually part of the uniform.
Yeah. So the hat in the back, is that the Abraham Lincoln hat?
Yes, my Abraham Lincoln hat. Yeah. That's and you know what? But even that, like, you don't even know, like, it's crazy because I was in a, I have to tell you this, like that Abraham Lincoln line, I don't even tell people this like as much, but that was somebody was like, I was on my way to go do a show in Jamaica. I had to fly through New York to get to Jamaica, and there was like a group of kids that had like this Jamaican shirt on, like I don't know, they were going some like pilgrimage, something back home, like I don't know what the story was, but I could tell the kids were American kids, but they were like sniggling and all that in the airport or whatever, and I had walked by, and usually I'm with the full, I got my guy with me, I got somebody else, but this particular, I think it was during Passover. It was during Passover. So, and I had a program that I was going to go play at, and I was by myself. It was the first year I'm traveling ever by myself to go do a concert, whatever. So I walked past, and I hear the kids going, "Oh, the Black Abraham Lincoln," and they were clowning.
So,
they,
so that
they,
line came from kids joking,
that
trying
kid,
to
the
crack a
kids
jokes.
clowning. And they didn't think I heard them, right? So finally we get on the plane or whatever, and I'm getting closer, and I can, this and over there, and they're sniggling or whatever, and so I heard them. So when I got over by, I said, "Oh, what, the Black Abraham Lincoln?" And he was like, "Oh no, man, that was her, man." She was like, "No, he said it." They're like whatever. And I was like, "No, I know a good joke when I hear one. That was a good joke." So I memory banked that. I
Yeah.
memory banked that, and then I use it in the song as like, the Black Abraham Lincoln. Um,
Right.
yeah, but I got that from the kids from being ranked on. What's the crazy connection? When you look at the Strimo hat that I was wearing, the fur hat, why do we wear that? It's the same thing. The Europeans used to make fun of Jews, I think specifically in Ukraine, Russia, and they would make drawings of them with foxtails and stuff like that on their head or whatever. So they say, "Oh, what? You think that's funny? That's gonna be my Shabbos clothes. That's gonna be my clothes for Shabbat. I'm gonna start." So it was like sort of like taking it and run around. I did it with the Abraham Lincoln line.
Okay, so for people who don't understand, for them to understand, is
Hmm.
that the purpose of it, of wearing it, is just like wearing just I guess like a daichiki or something that someone that is culturally
Right.
African culture will wear. Not so much of it that it's a Torah commandment or an instruction or nothing like that. It would
Right.
just be from a perspective of, hey, okay, they made fun of us, so we're just going to flip it and make it into something that's going to be a part of us that we wear during Shabbat. Is that kind of how it is?
Yeah, exactly. It's not a commandment. It's just very it became cultural, and then it became uniforms. And the uniforms became very important because you had the Haskalah movement. The Haskalah movement that happened around the industrial movement of Jews who started to go wayward, and they were trying to convince the masses. These were not just some Stam Jews. These were Jews that were very educated, very, very smart. They went to the Torah academies, and they would start to sneak back into the congregations and try to convince people to leave traditional Judaism. And
Hmm.
so, in order to find out and to be able to know which ones they were, the rabbis started instituting uniforms so they'd be able to pick out who the guy wasn't, who wasn't a part of it. So that was one of the reasons for the uniforms. So and in terms of just the traditional Judaism, we're not so fast to throw anything out, you know what I mean, without for good purpose. And there's a mandate in Torah law, in Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, that says that you should look and be distinct from the nations. So as people started to change their dress, we held on to the way they dressed wherever they were. The Jews in Morocco stayed dressing that way, and then in Europe they dressed that way, and whatever. So it was just sort of we didn't progress with the times. More modern Jews, they do progress with the times. The people that are traditionalists, they stick with the uniform in order to keep their adherence to that law.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about your transition from, because we stopped at Christianity, we went from Islam to Christianity. So let's
Hmm.
talk about your transition to Judaism, or someone say Judaism.
Hmm.
Um, what was your first experience, and why the transition from Christianity. We know the transition from Islam, and we
Hmm.
talked about that. Really wasn't a kind of a devout type thing, but
Hmm.
you said that you had an experience as a Christian,
Hmm.
and you did what a lot of Christians don't do. They don't spend a lot of time. Not saying that all, but
Hmm.
a lot of them don't spend time in the devoutness of prayer and things like that.
Right. Right.
And so, what was the transition but from Christianity to Judaism?
Um, so that was more. That was also more one of like digging, and like I said, I was able to be alone for a while. So that was the beautiful part about it, was that there was nobody there encouraging me on a certain path. I just had myself. And I think the first thing was, is I seen a video by a messianic organization. I don't know what I was searching for. I was looking for, first thing was I started listening to debates between um, creationists and atheist scientists. Somehow in my Google search, I came across a movie called Zeitgeist Refuted.
Hmm.
Zeitgeist Refuted was a rebuttal to this video, Zeitgeist, obviously. And I never seen Zeitgeist, I seen the Refuted. So I clicked on it and they started talking about in order to rebuttal against this other place there who was comparing the birth of Jesus to all of the pagan deities. And
Hmm.
they were saying, oh yeah, you're very right that this looks like that, and this is that, and this and this and that. And then it started to go into like how the holidays were not really, and Jesus was Jewish, and he would have kept the Jewish holidays. And
Right.
this is different. So I was like, hold on, man, what? I remember, I was like, hold on a minute. Christmas is what? Christmas ain't, They explained to it. No, would have had to have been during why would they have been out? There was customary. Nobody would go out and be in a barn or where there was a harvest during the winter. In the dead in the winter it gets. I live in Jerusalem. It's cold.
Right.
So how would it get cold? I'm not far. I live right by Bethlehem. Bethlehem's
So
10 minute drive.
you're saying in December, all right,
Right,
December 25th,
right.
it's cold where you live right now.
Yes, it does get cold. Yeah. I mean, where I'm at, it ain't gonna. I live in a place called Beit Shemesh. Beit
Okay.
Shemesh means the house of the sun. So
Okay.
it doesn't get as cold here as it does in Jerusalem.
Right.
Bethlehem was just a little bit over, but it
Right.
gets cold. It definitely gets cold. It was cold this December for sure. Believe it. So the 25th day of the winter solstice had always been the day of the pagan deity from Mithra, Krishna. It goes on. The list goes on. So they're explaining all this, and I'm just like, wow, hold on, that makes sense. I remember when my one uncle came home from prison, he was telling me something like that, but I didn't remember. I just
Yeah.
talked it up. I wasn't listening to him. It's one of the things in Christian faith is just like, okay, something I don't know about. Oh, okay, whatever, throw it. Not really seeking to like try to understand anything, but I was at a place where I was open. God just saved me from the situation. I'm going to hear what the truth is, and I want the most authentic way that I can serve you.
Hmm.
So I started to dig deeper into this, and I started digging deeper, and I started digging deeper, and I started to look at the Bible with a whole new, and somebody else was speaking, and you have to look at it from Hebraic eyes. You got to see it from a whole, and you start to realize discussions couldn't have been the discussions that we understand them as, because we weren't even a part of the culture of the people. Like for instance, I remember at one point, there was a whole discussion about clean foods and unclean foods. Remember that if Jesus was saying that it's not what goes in, but it's what comes out that defiles a person, right? So a lot of people use that as okay. So pork is kosher. What's the
Hmm.
problem with pork? Pork must be kosher. But these are two Jews talking.
Right. 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 Right.
So that wouldn't even have been something inside of their head at the time, because they already knew you weren't even permitted to own those type of animals, and
Mhm.
anybody who was not was an outsider. He wasn't. You're not even allowed to own them, let alone to eat them.
That's right.
So if they're having that conversation, he could have been talking about lion or any of those other things. There had to be a deeper part of that conversation. So I started looking at it from Jewish eyes and saying, hold on, this is something completely different. And then so as I continued to progress, I started coming across also Chabad, or Chabad is that does a lot of Jewish outreach and stuff like that. And so then I started getting the Orthodox perspective. And
Hmm.
then, so it was just sort of like me going. And the first thing I did was I started going to a Messianic congregation,
Hmm.
which wasn't far from my house at the time, which is much more traditional and went a lot. They did a lot more things in accordance with traditional Judaism, meaning like when you go in there, most of the prayers were in Hebrew.
Right.
People wore, tallis, a prayer shawl, and the kippahs was a beautiful, and the design of the shul was very much so like even an Orthodox shul, a synagogue or whatever. So when I started going there, and they would take from both. They were both obviously trying to keep with the most ancient Christian tradition, and also with the Orthodox Judaism, and was sort of like weaving, them together. So I was there for about 2 years. The problem that I still had, not to get into like anything like so much even like theological, was
Right.
it was really major issues I was having, and each thing was another breakdown. Because not only that, I started reading the apocryphal books. I started reading church fathers. Started studying church fathers. Not a lot of Christians learn church fathers.
Right.
When you start looking at what the early believers of Jesus started to believe, the whole thing starts to get very, very shaky to me, in my opinion. It was
Hmm.
because the leader after he died was James, his brother. It
Hmm.
wasn't Peter. It wasn't Paul. Paul authored a great deal of the New Testament, and when you start to look at the letters, it's almost as if they're somewhat in contention with each other. Paul mentions a contention in one place. He says that when Peter came down, I opposed him straight to his face, the way he was acting towards the other people. You've seen this contention, but even with that, Paul was much more Jewish than what people are looking at, because Paul or Saul, whatever, when it came a time in the book of Acts when they said that Paul, he was already having these issues, but
Right.
they're telling the people amongst everybody that you are now telling the Jews that are living amongst the non-Jews to they don't have to keep Torah anymore.
Right.
James say? He says, we know this isn't true. So
Mm.
what you should do is take a korban, a sacrifice in front of everybody, and go take it to the temple or whatever to prove. Paul got into
Right.
another sticky situation. I forget where it was, but he got into it. It was also in the book of Acts. He got another sticky situation. What would he stand up and say his defense was? I'm a Pharisee. I'm from
Yeah.
the Perusian.
Yeah.
I'm from the Pharisee.
Yeah.
And the reason why they're contending with me is because I believe in the resurrection of the dead, which was a major point of contention between the Parushim and the Tzaddukim, the Pharisees and the Sadducees at this.
Hmm.
So I start to see the whole entire text as being much more Jewish. You understand what I'm saying? More
Right.
than I
Right.
did or Hebraic from that standpoint at that time. So things would begin to sort of, mesh a little bit. But then when I started, like, when you look at the Didache or you look at certain things, they didn't really understand Jesus so much as as a virgin birth. Like, if there's enough sources there at the beginning. Unfortunately, I'm a little dusty, so I don't remember everything that I learned. I know, like Didache and other things, that didn't
Hmm.
necessarily believe in the virgin birth, and they did believe he was the Messiah, but they thought that he was born of Joseph, and he looked like Joseph. Joseph taught him astray. So you had, which is not different than other groups, even in Orthodox Judaism, that believes that their rabbi is the Messiah, whatever, right? So so it seemed like that was sort of like where it was going, and I think the turning points for me was that I couldn't really. It wasn't like much more of a theological thing that hit me as much as it was what was that truth for me? What did I look at and say that that it was the truth for me? I think it was the fact that I had to make up in my mind the reality of when I'm looking at all of these different texts, and I was very big on Tanakh, and I read it. I tried to go through the New Testament and I couldn't, and I set it down. And I said, God, I'm starting over. I don't know. And I wasn't just like playing, I was praying like 3 hours at a time. I was fasting. I would take a week, I would go 3 days in a row, no food. I was crying out to God, begging him for the truth. And I couldn't help that my eyes and my heart, that the conversation was just illuminating me, and Judaism itself was illuminating to me. And I started to think that, will God really do that to his people? Will he really like just reject them? They're no longer grafted in, but then they'll be back grafted. And it was a whole problem for me because if you look at, there's a very, very important passage, and I think it's in Hosea. I don't know how you say it. How do you say Hosea in Hebrew and in English? Hosea,
Hosea,
the
Hosea,
prophet,
yeah,
Hosea the
Hosea.
prophet, right? Where it's very, very clear there that it's not about the sacrifice, because it talks about when the sacrifices are gone. It says that God says, "Take up with you words and return to me." In
Mhm.
traditional Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, how do we return to God? How do we make amends? We have no sacrifice,
Yeah,
right? Isn't it that there needs to be blood given for the remission of sin? No, it can't be, because the prophet is saying right there how we're going to return. We won't have our temple anymore. As destruction is coming to the temple, how are we going to return? He says to take up with you words. We're going to speak and confess to God and come back to Him, even without there being a sacrifice. So
right.
now the sacrifice is our prayers and all those things. So it was a many things at that time like that made me feel like that I was already going in the right path. I had some other experiences, but like I said, I don't want to get like crazy. I did have like a crazy like dream type revelation thing or whatever. I don't talk about these things because I don't want people to think
Yeah.
I'm crazy, but
We
that
we could
really let me
we could come
know.
back and we could come back for part two and kind of
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
we come
that
back
and
to
kind of get
it.
into some of that
Yeah,
stuff. But so from that perspective, you was just pretty much in search of just and it just kind of led you to the Torah and the Tanakh and
right,
things like that. And so you were just trying to grow and develop a closer relationship with God and
right.
things like that. And so it kind of transitioned that. Would you say that you are still in process of your understanding of the scriptures? Would you say are you still looking in and examining and things like that? You know, some people get to the road where they like, okay, this is it, I'm done, I'm parking right here. Or do you still have have the car in drive and your foot on the brake, just kind of waiting to see, okay, you know, as things progress or whatnot, or if the Most High leads me, you know, this way, I'll go that way. So pretty much your heart is still open to more of an understanding and revelation, would you say?
Yeah, yeah. I think to some degree, yes. And I feel like, nothing detracted from the other. Like if you look at my journey, I went in chronological order.
Right.
Judaism came first, then Christianity. Even you would say even the early Messianic groups, then Christianity, and then Islam came after that, right? So I went in chronological order backwards
Hmm.
to some degree. And the way that I looked at it is that each one was a building block upon another. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? I'm saying like, okay, obviously today I'm not a believer in Jesus. I'm not in terms of,
Right.
don't believe in that. But the major components of faith that I share with Christianity or that Judaism shared, I've only added on top of those things. You understand
Right.
what I'm saying? And it wasn't because of just okay, theologically, oh, that couldn't be. It's just a matter of the fact that my perception of what Messiah means and
Right.
what that is in terms of Judaism. And I think the thing was like this, if a person took the Bible and they took just the let me just say the Hebrew scriptures, just the Old Testament Tanakh,
Hmm.
and you went and gave it to them and you told them to go sit in the middle of the desert. You told them to read it, and I want you to tell me about the past, the present, and then the future.
Hmm.
The past would be a lot easier. They could tell you, well, Abraham lived, and it was that, and it was King David, and whatever, and whatever, and then the present, it will get a little bit, probably a little bit more blurry. You know what I'm saying? Well, these things are a little bit older. I don't know how they say, but in the future, oh, there is a big promise about the future. There's a promise about Israel, but I don't really know if it's what happened already before or what's going to happen. What I mean is like this: is that these things become very, very vague without the understanding. And
Hmm.
who were the ones that introduced really the idea that were able to take out from the scriptures the idea of there being a Messiah? We
Right.
can look at it now and say, oh, yeah, it's very clear that it is. But back
Right.
then, that wouldn't have been the actual understanding because the Sadducees were scholars in Torah. They also didn't believe in it,
That's
right?
right. That's
They were
right.
scholars. So they didn't believe that there was a such thing as a Messiah and the
Yeah.
resurrection of the dead.
Resurrection. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't believe any of this. And they were scholars, majority leaders at one point, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at that, that's not a natural thing that you have. So these Pharisaic rabbis, or which came from, actually the line of Ezra on,
Hmm.
whatever, that they introduced the idea of Messiah. There's supposed to be a Messiah. There's a Redeemer that is coming from amongst the brethren. He must
Right.
come, right? Because everything else is very vague and obscure. You wouldn't even know. You wouldn't say emphatically, yes, there's going to be. They brought the clarity. So then the ones who bring the clarity, they also brought the rules.
Right.
He has to come from here. It's very clear. And he has to be like this, and he has to accomplish these things and all that. So if someone comes and then they say another group from even from the outside to say that no, this is the one, he's the Messiah. Well, hold on. We're the ones that introduced even the idea of Messiah. How you get to make the rules now? Now you get to say he's this and he's that and he's this and that. But before that, there was no idea of even the fact that there was even a Messiah.
Right.
So that's understand that. So that's where things kind of got like, shaky for me. And I start to understand that out of the however many denominations of Christianity there are, which I have a lot of love for and respect for, I still
Mm.
believe in Christian and Jewish unity. I believe we serve the same God. I don't believe any like weird things. We may have a disagree about the Messiah coming in. We'll see. Somebody will be right?
Right.
So, but at the end of the day, when you look at it, most denominations of Christianity have issues with the other, and it's not small things.
Right.
Like in Judaism, we have different types. You have Jews from Europe, you have Jews from so, and we do things differently,
Right.
right? But at the end of the day, I could pray in that synagogue. They could come in mine, and we're all good. We believe in no. We're all going to the same place afterwards or whatever.
So
It's
so
like
so you're saying
Christianity
so you're
is.
saying Messianic. So you're saying Messianic Jews
Mm-hmm,
and what we consider non-Messianic Jews.
mm-hmm.
You could go into a Messianic Jewish synagogue and still have prayer. Is
Maybe
that what
the
you're
issue,
saying?
the issue with Messianic Jews is a question. Only reason why is because the reason why they say there would be a question is because the connection to Christianity.
Mhm.
That's the only that's the only issue. But I think in like the purest form of the law, in the purest form of the law, in a place where there's no worship or belief, where he is God, and without the symbolism, to my understanding, technically a traditional Jewish person can pray just like he can pray in a mosque. An Orthodox Jew can pray inside of a mosque because
So so so
they
so
believe in God is one. They believe
right.
God is one.
So let me ask
So,
you, in Israel today, somebody just put in the chat, Brother Yeshayahu says the World Christian Encyclopedia says there are over 40,000 different Christian denominations.
wow.
So what you're saying is essentially is that in today in Israel, what is the relationship? Uh, Let me ask you, is there a Messianic movement of Judaism in Israel today?
I think so. I'm not involved, so I don't know, but I think there is. But it's a different. But even within Messianic, it's also
Uh,
different groups, right?
right.
You
Yeah.
get the Hebrew Messianic, and it was for sure way different than the congregation that
Yeah.
I was involved in when I was Messianic.
Yeah.
But I think that there is. I think that there is for sure.
So
I think that
so
there is.
is there a beef in Israel today between Orthodox and those who would be considered non-Orthodox who are Messianic?
I don't think it's an ongoing contention. I think that when the paths meet, if there's any type of sense of missionizing,
Yeah.
absolutely there's beef. Absolutely. But you know what I'm saying? Because nobody wants to be missionized
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
In Judaism, we already have. We're not going to missionize anybody to become Jew. That's just not our way.
Right.
But I think that there is. But when I was referring to more of those, like you see it more amongst like the Christian denominations, right? Like the 40,000 that he's talking about.
Uh-huh.
Like it's not like you just in a different denomination. A lot of them believe like if you're in the other one, you're going to hell. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
it's like it's serious business. It's like, man, not only I gotta choose this, man, then I gotta choose the right denomination on top of that. And almost all of them will point their finger back at Catholicism and say, you're wrong, dead wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's the foundation for all of them.
Mm.
And so if there's a problem at the foundation, then I'm already on slippery roads. You understand? So
Right.
that's the problem. That's the beginning, the foundation of the church as we know it and all of its denominations, to Pentecostal, to Baptist, or whatever. So if the foundation is rocky and everybody points back and say, oh no, they're doing wrong, and they do marry and they got all this other stuff going on, which I can understand. You can
Yeah.
see that that's not a part of the traditional text, but if you're Christian and you still keep Christmas, also too, Catholic priests
Stop
don't
in the
lie
scene.
about.
Stop. You causing trouble.
No, no, I don't mean that. I'm not trying to say
No,
anything about. I know
I'm
today
just
it's
joking.
just symbolism. Today is symbolism. I understand that, but I'm saying, but like the same energy where the whole like Mary thing is coming from, that's also they admit they say that it was pagan. My father's who I respect completely as a scholar, as an individual, as a man. He's a Christian, he's a pastor, and I respect him 1,000%. But he even knows that these things are Hellenistic, right?
Right.
So it's not something, and why he does it's up to him. I don't care. I'm never going to tell my father you're wrong or something like whatever. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that understanding. For my thing was like if I felt like the foundation there was some issue with the foundation, then I can't hold on. I was able to believe the testimony of the rabbis better than I was able to believe the testimony of the church, and
Mm,
that's what it came down to. That's what it
right.
came down to.
Right.
It was sort of like you know I can't hold on to this. Everybody around me that I know that like looks at traditional Orthodox Christianity, everybody looks at it and says, no, there's extra books inside of there that wasn't part of the canon. The whole everything. The other denominations look back and say you're wrong. So then it's like that's the foundation. And then with traditional Orthodox Judaism, you didn't have that contention. You understand what I'm saying? And the questions and the things that may be contradict are welcome. It's not shut up and just have faith. It's welcome to have the question. Let's
Right.
delve into it. Let's go
Right.
deeper into it. Now, in fact, you don't find the contradiction. I'll find it. I'm going to find the contradiction for you, and I'm going to show you how this all came to be. So it was just a much easier place to stand on and say that's your foundation. You know what I mean? As opposed to over there. And so,
Okay.
like I said, the Messianic movement is great in terms of I look at it as a due process. For me, it was a process that brought me into actual Orthodox Judaism. But whatever the case was, for other people, it's bringing people into the realization of the God of Israel, the importance of the Jewish people all over the world, what it means to God, the coming redemption. So I think that is like the main, like the beauty of it. People waking up, realizing they have roots themselves. If they do have Jewish roots. You mentioned you're from the Lumba descent, like
Limbo. Yeah.
wasn't that one of the Lumber, like that was one of the most beautiful discoveries, you know what I'm saying, in recent generations that they found, what I mean, that gene within, over 50% of the males. So
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing, and there's ways to bring about ultimate redemption, I think, for the world from all of us uniting, to be honest.
Well, since I mean, you just love to just transition us
I'm
into where
sorry.
we need to go anyway. So lastly, before I let you roll, and I know you just kind of brought us into, we was talking about the Limba Jews and things like that, and the discovery and things like that. In fact, we had Professor Tudor Parker who discovered them. I interviewed him on here, and he's helping in our community as well. There's a lot of Limba Jews that are here in America and whatnot. And uh, so let me ask you this. Now in Israel, because you've had the experience to have the best of both worlds. You're familiar with what's going on in America. You're
Right.
still doing tours and things like that. You experience online, but you also reside in Israel and you're there more. Is now there's what we consider a conversion
Hmm.
of someone who's Jewish, and we're talking about Black Jews now. Okay,
Right.
so
Okay.
a conversion of those who would be considered Black Jews, and then you also in Israel, would there be a community of those who are Black Jews by blood, not by conversion,
Mhm.
but are you or have you been in contact with them? Do you hear people talk about them? What
So
are their
come on,
practices?
outside of the Ethiopian community, outside of Beta Yisrael.
Right, like Beta Israel as well. You could kind of talk about them as well,
Mhm.
and those who are outside of
Right.
that with, like Moroccan Jews, Yemenite Jews, or
Mhm.
what are, as far as, because many people over here, it's kind of an intriguing conversation. I'm pretty sure over there, I talked to brothers who live there, and they like, man, we don't even talk about, like, it's not even something we
It's not
even
even a thought, right, right,
we
right.
don't even argue about it. So yeah, you want to kind of share that for the audience?
Right. So yeah, I think because and I've said this before, like tradition, especially being in America, most of the Jewish community that people encounter there is Ashkenazi
Hmm.
descent, who came from Europe, who have white. And I say this very, very strong and very matter of fact. There are people who have white skin, but that are not white. Right?
Yeah.
Hitler didn't treat them like they were white.
Mhm.
So for sure, we're not going to say that they are white, but they have white skin based
Right,
on
right,
where they were demographically and whatever took place, just like Jews look like wherever they were demographically.
right.
Um, so I would say that, and they fit in well over there in white society. So like, okay, Jews are white, but so because of that, when you come to Israel, like you mentioned, you have the Beta Yisrael, you have Ethiopian, you have the Taimani Jews who are also darker, who come from Yemen, and you have Jews from Morocco, like you said. They have so many different groups, and then you have also two people that are of African descent that were born Jewish. There are people that were in America who maybe their parents even converted or whatever the case is.
Hmm.
But I think when you start thinking about that and you start looking at like a big thing that's been talked about more um, right now is the Igbos. The
Hmm.
Igbos in Nigeria
Hmm.
and their connection to Torah and you have to understand so too. Convert doesn't always mean seriously convert. Any person that's Jewish doesn't matter if they're blue,
Right,
green,
right.
black, whatever the case is, if they cannot prove their Jewish ancestry,
Hmm.
right? Which we're not talking about DNA. DNA, we don't look
Right,
at DNA for proof of Jewish ancestry.
right,
It could be telling of stuff and we can
right.
use it, but we don't consider it for Jewish ancestry.
Okay.
But if you can't be able to find either documents, pictures, proof of grandparents that were also religious and all that, then
Hmm.
you naturally have to do a conversion based on a doubt, you know,
Right,
um,
right.
and that's just a part of it because we have to be sure that the person is. Same thing with the Ethiopian Jews. I
Hmm.
think it was one rabbi said not they didn't have to, but a lot of other people that's what they required was that they went through it again because there were major key components of the faith that they did not have when they were gone, and so
So,
for the doubt
so let
they
me let me
wanted to
ask
convert back in.
let
Right.
me ask you this. I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to ask you this real quick before I lose the thought of that.
Hmm.
Um, so when you have those that are naturally born there, right?
Right.
You have
Right.
those naturally born there without a shadow of a doubt.
Right.
Everybody knows they're born. They have the state acknowledges them. They have a
Yeah.
traditional history. These are
Right.
Black Jews. We know who they are. This and third. So then you also have those who are like Beta Israel, who we're talking about Ethiopian Jews,
Hmm.
who say, hey, we're Jewish. We can prove this, that, and the third.
Hmm.
So it will be based on, because the DNA, I guess the DNA is a new finding the past few years. So now in order to deal with um others who maybe consider themselves, would they have to go before like a board of the rabbis or something
Yeah.
like that to
They have to go back to a base din in order to convert back in and to be what we say to accept the Torah, all of the Torah, not just so the problem with like we're saying, I hate to keep bringing it up, but Beta Yisrael, they had the written Torah, but they didn't have the oral Torah.
so would they be
So
considered would they be considered Jews by conversion, or would a person be how does it is the
that's a
structure?
very good question. It's a very good question because I don't know technically, I don't know the answer. And I think because of the doubt, there's
Right.
some that say yes, some that say that they would be considered converts. That
Mhm.
others would say they're not converts, but they had to do this for to go through this certain procedure, ceremonial procedure in order to come back into the faith, but we don't consider them converts. And the truth of it is, these things really don't even matter as much
Okay.
in terms of Orthodox Judaism as much as like who's a convert and who's not, because it's, it's one law. So
Right,
nobody
right,
really,
right.
and according to Jewish law, you're not really able to ask somebody, "Are you a convert?" You know, if you're Jewish, you
Okay.
can't ask somebody that.
Right,
Um, so because the way the Torah wants that nobody should feel like, oh, they came from. You shouldn't remind converts of whether if they're not telling you the story, you're not allowed to remind them of where they came from or any of that. The laws are very strict about that,
okay.
and you must take care of So and to be quite honest, it's the it's one of the only mitzvahs, if not the only Torah commandment that's mentioned as many times as it is to love the
Right.
ger, love the convert, to love the
Mhm.
convert, to love the convert. So it's one of the highest mitzvahs. So you're not really even allowed. There's really almost no distinction when you're in the community. It's not you're not in the distinction. A lot of people who feel a certain way, they don't want to be like, I don't want to be called a convert, you know what I mean? But
Right,
the
right,
truth is, like, once you're in the community, you're not thinking about, oh, am I a convert? Am I not? It's no
right.
different. You can marry. Only place it would be if the person is a Cohen, he would not be able to marry a convert, but he can marry the daughter or the third generation of a convert. But
Okay.
that's only place where these things come in.
Right. So lastly, let me say this. Um, so is the is the religion also tied to the citizenship? Like, is it like in order to be a citizen, you have to be a convert or someone who accepts? Because like in America, it's like the separation between church and state and all this other stuff. Religion doesn't play a role in being a citizen. And so
Mhm.
in Israel, how is that established and set up?
Um, I know completely, but if you are Jewish, they have over here called I think it's called the law of return. Last I
Mhm.
understood, and that was like anybody who Hitler would have killed.
Right,
Can be considered. That's a convert, person born Jewish, only the father's Jewish, which according to traditional Judaism is not. It doesn't mean the Jewish means a person would have to convert if the father was Jewish when the mother wasn't. It goes
right,
by the mother. On a side note, there's some crazy cases of people whose father is Palestinian, his mother's Jewish. He's got a big problem because by Islam it goes by the father, and
right.
Judaism goes by the. You got a lot of crazy situations over here. But anyway, so so over here in terms of the state, that's the way that it works. I mean, when I did my paperwork or whatever, I was able to prove of Jewishness. I had papers that prove my Jewishness, and so anybody's asked for that, even if they're Jewish and they were born Jewish, you have to have proof that that you are Jewish and under one of those categories,
Mhm.
and that you can get citizenship based on that.
Well, Brother Nassim, man, I appreciate you for coming on.
Thank you.
Definitely look forward to having you on again. We could get into some other conversations,
Love
just
to
things
do it.
like that, and build and still talk about music and things like that.
Right.
At the end of the day, I mean, I know brothers who are Muslims. They got dope music. Especially here
Right.
in America, you got five percenters. You got all Nation
Right.
NOI and things like that. So definitely appreciate you for going coming on. I appreciate you for putting up with my interviewer hat. I put the interview hat on, and so I think that is very important to definitely really be able to build and have conversation and things like that. So I'm gonna end the live, but then stay on, Brother Nassim, and we can chat a little bit and then go
Okay.
from there. I thank everybody for tuning in, man. I appreciate everybody for support. I thank everybody that is on. You guys, I tried to get to every question, but I wanted to really stick to the interview. The next time we can open it up, and then I'll allow brothers and sisters. We'll did get into like more questions and things like that because it's very intriguing for brothers and sisters over here and whatnot. And so I'll come back later on, brothers and sisters, and kind of talk about the interview and things like that. But at this time, I really appreciate Brother Nassim Black for coming on as well. I know many of you already told me you have his music and things like that. So thank you all. Let me go ahead and end the live stream.